We will now look into results frameworks. The result framework is a summary of our intervention. It shows the program logic and explains how the development objective is to be achieved, including causal relationships and underlying assumptions. The framework gives a systematic presentation of the expected results of a program and how these results are going to be realized. Through the use of indicators and means of verification, the framework also provides key criteria for success and a presentation of how we will monitor and assess progress towards the achievement of expected results. The results framework also provides guidance for dialogue with partners on program design, outcomes, progress, and achievements. It provides a framework for reporting to the authorities and the public, and more generally to communicate the results achieved. The intervention logic is based on a chain of results that corresponds to our pathway of change that we treated in Module 2, where inputs in the form of human and financial resources are used to undertake activities that will produce outputs that in turn will lead to outcomes contributing to the desired impact. Please take a moment to read through the different levels of the results chain. Remember, you can always pause the video. Once you have established your pathway of change or your chain of results, then you can use this to create the left column of your results framework, the one we call intervention logic. The intervention logic is the backbone of the results framework. By inserting in the right column the remaining assumptions we talked about lately in the assumption chapter, then we can make what they sometimes call the zigzag logic explicit. I will show that in a second. So reading these two columns together constitutes an acid test on the robustness of our development intervention. If we don't believe in this logic, we should either add activities, revise the project setup, or simply abandon the project idea. As can be seen from the results framework, the assumptions are the glue that shall make the causal pathway work. If assumptions fail, then the intervention logic does not work. If we take the example of the training of journalists, the logic goes like this. If funding for the training is made available, then training can be organized. If training is implemented, it should lead to increased knowledge on investigative journalism, provided that trainers know trainees' requirements sufficiently well. If journalists have increased knowledge on investigative journalism, then it will lead to more investigative media outputs, provided that editors and owners allow the journalists to write critically. And finally, if journalists produce more investigative media outputs and people read it, then it will lead to increased critical public debate, provided that the readers are responsive to investigative critical journalism. As mentioned earlier on, the logical framework approach and the results-based management approach build on the same if-then logic, and most of the tools are practically the same. Both approaches invite us to try to understand and analyze the current situation, to imagine the future situation, and then make a thorough plan for how we can get from A to B. In some LFA guidebooks, there is a distinction between the analysis phase and the detailed planning phase, where you, based on the thorough analysis, finalize the results matrix and start scheduling your activities and resources. The results framework plays an important role in the planning phase to give an overview and help making the project setup as robust and realistic as possible. But the planning doesn't stop with the results framework. There will most often be a need to further detail the activities and the resources needed to undertake them. The next 3 slides are about activity and resource scheduling. Activity scheduling. Well, making a time schedule is easy, but making a good and realistic time schedule is more challenging. And securing ownership to the time schedule can be even more difficult. So, some piece of advice. A good time schedule must be realistic in terms of the duration of each of the activities. It will have to show the relative order of the activities and the links between them if there are any. The time schedule should preferably reflect important milestones, decision points, or other important phases. It should definitely involve relevant stakeholders. If they are involved in the planning, it will create ownership and it will ensure that the time schedule becomes more realistic, as the people who are going to undertake the activities often know better how much time it will take. It is a good idea to make the planning process open and transparent. Make sure that everybody is aware of the latest version of the time schedule and know which activities they are involved in or responsible for. And then finally, time schedules must always be updated. An outdated version isn't really worth much. Here's an example of an activity schedule. They come in many forms. Depending on the type of project, you might want to have months or weeks or even days in your schedule instead of quarters. That depends. Or you might want to make a detailed plan for the first quarter and then continue detailing the other quarters as you come closer. Here's another example where the activities and the resources are combined. Once we know what activities we want to undertake, we can start budgeting resources. By including the budget for each activity, you have what we call an activity-based budget. This constitutes a great advantage if you want to follow up on progress and resource consumption for each of the activities later on. Remember to allow for the unforeseen when estimating time and resources. It's a good idea to put in a buffer in both the activity and the resource schedules. Try also not to make what we sometimes call sunshine planning. That is a plan that can only work if everything goes 100% as planned, and it never does. So make realistic plans and realistic budgets instead of being too optimistic. Before we leave the submodule on results frameworks, here are a few key points to remember. First, the results framework shall only be made after a thorough analysis of both the current situation, the future desired situation, and the pathway of change have been made. Then you'll know which activities will be the right ones to undertake, which is good to know before you start investing time in planning and resourcing them. Secondly, a piece of advice. It can be very practical to use a logic way of numbering outcomes, outputs, and activities. For instance, activity 111, 112, and 113 will be the ones needed to produce output 11. And then outputs 11, 12, and 13 will be the ones that lead to outcome 1. It makes it easier for you, and it will make it easier for the reader to understand the logic. Finally, remember to update and to adjust your results framework as you go along. A lot of things might change or not develop the way you have anticipated. that will call for a change in the results framework, and it should be a dynamic document.